Here we are today on May 5th at the task force meeting here in Roxborough, and today we have Sherry Wilburn. She is the EDC director for Person County. She's going to be giving you all a presentation on how the EDC works here in Person County, what she likes, dislikes, what she'd like to see done better, and what she sees for the future.
Thank you. Well, I took notes from all the other ones, and I brought a little bit of that with me, made some highlights from what some of the other presenters said. And I mean, I just want to acknowledge that you all have your work cut out for you. You've heard so many different models, and even with that, they've talked about, well, we used to be this way, and now we're this way, and it was, you know, some had went from one to the other and back and forth, and then there's still other models, like the Committee of 100 that has the potential to bring outside money into the county. I think that probably what Commissioner Gentry has shared with you about our history, it may be more in-depth than what I would know, because I didn't go back and research it, but you know, my understanding is that in the 80s, the commissioners established the EDC, and then in the early 90s, PCBIC, Person County Business and Industrial Center, was formed, and they were completely different boards. PCBIC seemed to be doing industrial development. I'm not sure how they were funded, but somewhere along the way, that board became made up of the same membership as the EDC. And so by default, they're publicly appointed, and the funds that they had at the time that I came on the scene in 2013 were clawback funds from force protection. And so that was, this might be public money because it came from the county originally, it might not, it was kind of up in the air, but ultimately it was determined that PCBIC was a public board because it is publicly appointed, there's public control. So we do have a 501c3 nonprofit in place, but it's kind of an anomaly in that it's a public nonprofit rather than a private nonprofit. And there is a path to making that private with what we already have. So.
And the bylaws for that 501c3 state it's public, or, I mean, is there a matching of the bylaws with it being public?
The bylaws, maybe the articles of incorporation, I'm not sure if they were ever changed.
Got it.
So the way that the EDC is structured, when I came on, it was made up of 9 voting members. That's the max you can have for a public board. You can have fewer. And they were stakeholders. So it was the county manager, the city manager, the mayor, the chairman of the board of commissioners, the chairman of the chamber, the chairman of the Uptown Roxborough group, excuse me, the community college president, the workforce dean for the community college, and 1 citizen representative at large. And so that was done in 2012, and there was kind of a redo of the ethics policies and the bylaws and everything at that time. And so we had a number of changes from then to now. Sometime at one point the board was completely, you know, dissolved and redone, but there were changes all along the way where ex officios were added. So when the board was restructured that one time, I forget what year, I think maybe 2018, it was done for the sake of making it more, have more business input, and they saw the value of having these stakeholders, so they were more or less made ex officios, but 8 business leaders were added to the board at that time, and that's the structure we still have. So our ex officios are made up of the community college president, the county manager who can vote in absence of the chairman, the city manager, farmland representative, which is Claudia Berryhill, and the superintendent of schools. So we meet monthly, both boards, EDC and PCBIC. Our office supports that administratively with 2 staff people, me and 1 administrative support position. We also manage the property of PCBIC, the industrial park out at Crown Boulevard, make sure that gets mowed and the lights stay on, and, taxes get paid on all the property that they own, in addition to overseeing the budget for that and the budget for the county ED department and the budget for the EDC. So that is another anomaly between us and most counties that have an EDC, is that our EDC actually has some discretionary funds that they can go out and do projects with. And that started in, let's see, I got my budget here. That started in fiscal year 20, so 1920. The commissioners approved, on top of our department operating budget, $250,000 for EDC discretionary funding. They continued that in 2021 and allowed anything that was unspent from the previous year to be rolled into the next year. And so at this point, they have $640,000, and assuming that they continue that trend, allow it to roll over and add another $250,000, they would be up to $890,925 for the upcoming budget year for their discretionary spending. There's also an economic catalyst fund that has about $1.4 million in it right now, which they also, could have access to for projects.
When you say, discretionary funds, economic catalyst funding, generally speaking, what's the intention for those funds?
They have used it for.
Yeah, give me some examples. Yeah,
They've used it for due diligence. The county owns, I know y'all have talked some about, how we are product deficient right now and we need inventory. You've heard that from some of the other counties as well. So we were looking for some low-hanging fruit to get a more, closer to a pad-ready site. And the county owns 26 acres at North Park Drive, just to the right before you get to Spuntech. And so they use some of these funds to have the phase 1 and the geotech study. So we have that all the way to the point of all the permits, driveway, soil and erosion. There's a creek that you have to cross to access it, so we've got the core permit and everything's ready to go with that. And so they use those funds for that.
So you're doing development then?
Right.
Okay.
How do you access those funds? Do you have to go back and ask the county to use those funds, or is it just, hey, Sherry, if you guys wanna use the funds, you use the funds on what you see fit, and the board votes on it?
The EDC board votes on it
Okay.
for those funds.
Okay.
Are those funds only available for publicly owned properties, or can any of those funds be used on private properties?
They could use it to acquire private property. That at that point, there would be some controls by the commissioners, for contracts to be signed and things that wouldn't be able to be done without commissioner approval, but they do have flexibility.
Could they do due diligence, request on private properties? Is that possible?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay.
And if they built like a shell building, they can use that to fund the interest for a certain amount of time, as long as it.
Yes.
Okay.
So they did decide to do that. Between discussions with the EDC and the commissioners, they saw the need, have heard enough from enough different people that you don't have product, you don't have projects. And so we went down the road of doing an RFP. And so the way that was stated is that it would be confidential until there was an award. And at this point, it's on pause because of what we got back, being impacted by the raise in construction costs right now. So we'll go back to the drawing board and see if we wanna do some more work on the site to make it more pad ready and do a virtual shell building, if we wanna wait it out and see what's gonna happen with construction costs. But I know you kinda heard something similar from Kevin in Randolph County, that they were about ready to pull the trigger, and their developer actually pulled out for those reasons. Any other questions about that funding? Okay, Well, I'll move on to our staff. That was one of the things that it wasn't surprising to me to hear how much staff the other people had, because I obviously know all of those folks. The one that was probably most surprising was Rockingham County, because they had the most of everybody, with 6, and being a county department, and probably being the smaller of the ones y'all have talked to. But, you know, even in Wilson, they have 4 people. I know she said 3.5, but that's, like, the funding is half, but they have a full 4th person. You know, but they have a targeted focus of industrial development and industrial recruitment, whereas we're like the rest of them, and we cover it all. We do BRE, small business, the marketing, recruitment, development. Some of the projects we have going on right now are, of course, the mega site. So that was one thing that was different about us and the other counties, was that is a whole different beast in and of itself. And I know Randolph is kind of partnered with Greensboro on theirs, but I think apparently Greensboro does the marketing for that, since Kevin didn't mention it. But when you're talking about funding, that brings a whole new piece to the table, because that project, I mean, you would need to clear and grade 50 acres for the projects that look at that. So that's not nearly the same thing as we're looking at on that 26 acre, you know, to do a 60,000 square foot shell building. There's some other sites that may come online soon. I don't know if y'all are aware that some of the older buildings that we have changed hands. Lot Screen was changed hands and has a development owner now. Not sure what's gonna happen with that property yet, but I know they're out there doing work. There's another one that I'm hearing, the former Fleetwood building is under contract. And then used to be Crown Crafts outlet on Somerset Church Road. That one is also under contract and going along very well. So that's an encouragement that if we're having looks at that level, you know, people interested in buildings that have been vacant for years are coming here. You know, it's not the same as a Samet coming in on their own and paying $35,000 an acre to do a park. But it does show that there are people looking from outside of the county and seeing this as an investment opportunity. So we talked a lot lately, over the last few years, about our key needs, and product being one of them. But with where things are right now, I would say, as you compare us to the other counties, one of our critical needs is staffing. Kevin had the fewest, and he had 3 full-time economic development professionals. I would probably wager that since they're a private group, their administrative stuff is probably done, you know, by an accountant and maybe someone on their board for their minutes, but we take care of all of that with an administrative support and with me. So there's a lot more we could do in terms of the opportunities we have right now, locally and beyond, if we were more equipped with staff. So I have requested an additional position in the budget this year. I have not seen the manager's recommended budget, don't know if that will get approved, but I would consider that definitely a critical need. I was encouraged that the commissioners added positions at the request of the home builders and the building inspections. They were very responsive to seeing that, hey, here's what we need. If we don't grow our population, we're gonna have a hard time filling these jobs that are out there. So that was encouraging, and I'm looking forward to seeing if that carries over to our request. And so, speaking of those jobs, if we did have a product and I could do site visits, the first thing that they're gonna see when they come up 501 is the big banner at GKN that says hiring, you know, and all those signs around town. So that's another reason I think that we're okay maybe to put that building on pause. Our unemployment numbers have gone down to, let's see, they just came out again. So last month they were 5.9, and as of March, which is the most recent reporting we have, it's 4.8. So if you compare that to the state, that's 5.2. And if you compare us to some of those other counties that you all have talked to, ours are lower than Rockingham's and Wilson's, and Randolph and Alamance are at 4.5 while we're at 4.8. So along those lines, you know, pretty comparable with how we're doing. I had talked to Keith about, you know, we have on here a banker, a builder, and a broker. And I've talked to all of you over the last year about how busy you all are, so that is also a good sign of, you know, a good strong economy and growth. So what other questions can I answer about how we're structured? And I brought budget from the few previous years to show you how it's grown since from 2018 and what we're projecting for next year, if you have any questions about that.
So I'm encouraged that the commissioners have allocated this $250 as discretionary spending. They obviously see it as an investment, which is the way that we would perceive economic development. An investment, and you should expect a return, but the time horizon is not immediate. And that's where we're looking to try to come up with any necessary changes to the organizational structure that will provide for greater sustained funding to support you in any current and future staff. But I'm encouraged that the commissioners have been making that commitment / investment. The budget is to be approved annually, and there are no assurances of funding in there, if I'm correct.
That is
And
true.
from what we've heard, some of these other counties, there have been private contributions, in some cases the lion's share of the investment in economic development in a county or a municipality has come from the private sector. And some outside agencies have assisted in sort of garnering pledges from businesses over a multi-year period, which provides for, assuming that those pledges are honored, that provides for you know, really sustained funding and allows the economic development offices to undertake longer-term projects, court the kind of businesses that require a longer-term courtship. And so do you think, Sherry, that private support is critical to the long-term, to meeting the, I don't want to say that economic development here hasn't been successful, because it has, but I don't think we've reached our full potential. And I think that's sort of the purpose of our gathering here, not because of your efforts, but because of lack of resources devoted to economic development. So in your opinion, would the introduction of some private funds, granted the private businesses would then have some influence over, you know, our economic development activities and focus, but would that be something that might take our economic development to the next level?
Well, when we had a vacancy in this,
What a new model may look like.
for me, top of mind right now is staffing. I just came off working all weekend and a 16-hour day on Monday, so that's gonna be top of mind. We have project activity through the roof right now, and, you know, Brandy is able to support some research and things like that, but the lion's share of that falls on me. And then we have the people who expect that we do the one-off questions, and we wanna do that. We wanna support every person who calls and says, hey, we're thinking of moving there, where's their good internet? We wanna be responsive to all of that, and that's just a challenge when you have a department of 2. The other thing I think is the uncertainty that seems to keep rolling around, and you know, you don't ever get rid of politics in any model. I think that's been kind of clear, especially with the Rockingham going from private back to public. But I think the thing that can help us succeed the most is to stay on a course and have stability in our staff. I appreciated how Jennifer said that everybody knew their role in Wilson. Chamber knew that they did business support, and she knew she did industrial recruitment, and they had a downtown development that even had two boards and did recruitment for downtown. They had a TDA, and they all worked well together, but everybody had a piece of it. And since I've been with the county, there's been 4 chamber presidents. So, Alicia was the longest running, and we had a great relationship and a lot of synergy between our department and her. But since then, it's not really been, you know, consistent long enough. Lisa was great, and we had some things planned with her to do events to support manufacturing and whatnot. I really appreciated her vision for the chamber, but then unexpectedly, you know, she needed to move on, and I think Sam is great, but she's not had a chance to really get in there and put her mark on things, and we find ourselves just in a situation where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you know, there's all this growth and activity happening, and it's hard for us to even get on a call together.
That's a good point.
Do you get any help out of the state EDC people? You know, does anybody bring you prospects from the state?
Yes, I have a great relationship with them, and I think they're great. I mean, anytime you've got, you know, 5 or 8 people, you're gonna have your favorites that you work better with, or that you prefer to have projects that you work with. But, I mean, I heard, you know, Lee's comment about that, but I think what you heard from the others who have been on the North Carolina side was positive, and my experience has been positive. So I don't know if that was just a difference between what she experienced in Virginia that we don't have to compare to, or if it was just kind of a one project situation. But Hollywood, for example, you know, they brought us that lead, but as soon as I had the contact with the company, it was me and him from then on out, just like she said, very hands-on. And I think Tommy, Keith, I think 3 of you were at that announcement, you know, and they alluded to that. You know, it was the immediate responses that we got that, you know, allowed us to beat out South Carolina with a building on the interstate. So that's been my experience, and nobody from the state had any problems with me jumping in and saying, okay, you're gonna be the carbon copy from here on out, and we got this.
What's our collaboration like with Durham?
I had an excellent working relationship with Timothy Downs, who was there before, and he just left at the end of last year. In fact, he went on to a consulting engineering firm, and we still stay in touch a lot. Ryan Reagan, who just came from Asheville, you know, on LinkedIn, everybody knows everybody in economic development. It's a small world. So through RTRP, we've engaged a little bit, but we haven't started doing the in-person meetings yet. But I know them very well. We did a manufacturing sector partnership, or we attempted to. We went down that road for many months, and it was kind of a mismatch with them having 115 manufacturers and us having 15 manufacturers, and trying to marry that up. But that was intended to be an opportunity to, you know, grow our manufacturing sector with the whole region. And Timothy was the only one willing to do a regional partnership with us. We've reached out to several counties, and it could be bandwidth, so I'm not, you know, I totally understand that, but, yeah, they've been great partners.
What knocks us out of the running? When you see prospective businesses looking at Person County and they have a cut list, you know, for some reason don't have an airport, don't have a community college, whatever it is. What is it now that we're lacking that you hear from those? Well, you don't have this. What would it be?
Well, we don't have a building ready right now, and I had one unique opportunity where somebody reached out to me directly. They were looking for an existing building, but they said, somebody on our board, they were from another state, somebody on our board has Person County ties and says, we really need to look there. So we're willing to consider a build to suit in your community. And so, you know, Cecil knows that I reached out to them and several people who have done development in the past with properties. And we really tried to put a deal together for that, but when it came down to it, it was for a new building, it was gonna be, you know, between $5 and $8 a square foot for a lease rate. And they were in distribution, and they were able to find an existing building in another community at under $3 a square foot on the interstate. And, you know, they said, we really would like to have that relationship, but we just can't make that work. And I think they ultimately, they didn't even come to North Carolina.
So you mentioned the other EDC directors and knowing them. Do you have a annual conference or something you get together at, or how does that work?
I'm a member of the North Carolina Economic Development Association, NCEDA, and that is a very active group. They have a spring conference, an annual conference, and a fall conference. Typically don't do all three, but I usually will do the spring conference, which is shorter, and then the annual conference. So that again has been virtual for the last couple of years, so sometimes it can seem like there's a lot of turnover in economic development, and there may be some people I haven't met, like Brian, in person. But yeah, most of the folks around the region I know very well. And it's through RTRP here as much as it is through NCDA. And that's Research Triangle Regional Partnership. I think maybe you served on the EDC or PCBSC
EDC,
before,
yeah.
so I'm sure you're familiar with that organization.
Sherry, what are the term lengths for the directors of both the EDC and the PBCIC board?
This time around, they were appointed for 5 years, and so that term expires June 30th of next year.
And when you say they were all appointed at once?
They were all appointed at once, yes.
Do you think there would be benefit to staggering the expiration of terms just for continuity? And maybe you can't speak to it because they're only finishing their first term, but it
Yeah, I
just
haven't
seems to me
seen
like that
that.
might be a best practice, I don't know.
We did have it staggered, but I would anticipate that, you know, some of them would reapply and we'd still have that continuity.
And they can serve how many consecutive terms, do you know?
I don't think that was capped.
Okay.
Do you know Ted Budd?
Congressman Bud, yes. Yeah,
Did you see the letter he wrote recently?
I did, yes.
Yeah,
So
he had come in here and had meetings with with Gordon and 9 other people, and then we had, on a subsequent visit, we sent him to Sherry.
I sent an email to Kyle Bridges on his staff, and we communicate pretty regularly, and I forwarded him a link about, you know, freight trucks being affected by the semiconductor shortage, and reminded him of the excellent opportunity here with our permitted site and the executive order for the president. And he said, okay, I think this is great, I'm gonna take this and run with it. I also sent it to Senator Burr and Senator Tillis, and they responded back, you know, just with a thank you for keeping us reminded, and we'll keep this in mind. But Kyle actually had a letter written for the U.S. Secretary of Commerce and sent it there, and so then we've used that letter for projects that we've worked, and to make sure that Commerce knows about the letter, DDP&C knows about the letter. And so I was very impressed with how responsive he was with that.
Kyle, before going on Ted Budd's staff, worked in economic development. He has a background. He said Sherry was really instrumental in getting that information together for them. It was very helpful.
They also came up and toured Hollywood, maybe last month.
Mhm.
Congressman Bud.
Beyond the staffing, do you see any other areas that the private side sector board could help in which ways? It's like a wish list. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some things out there that obviously not covered. Have you put anything like that or thoughts on that?
You know, input, guidance, momentum, when you see that somebody else is willing to put money in, and the investment that they get back out of that and the opportunities, I think that it rolls over creates momentum for others, makes it more attractive.
Those are themes that we've heard from others too. You know, and if you get the local business community convinced that economic development is in their best interest, then they'll support it with funding, but maybe support it even more importantly with, you know, some of the intangibles.
We need a modern day Jay Long, you know who Jay Long was?
Get along.
J.A. Long?
Yeah.
He was the first developer, I guess,
Yeah.
of Person County.
I had a great conversation with, a guy who's a developer. He was helping us with our shell building analysis from the School of Government, but he also does private development. And, he said he was just thinking, you know, going back to the railroad and how towns were built out around the railroads. What's the railroad now that growth can center around? And so he always does his development in uptowns because he said, you know, the railroad brought the need for lodging, and then that brought the need for food and clothing and, you know, general merchandising. And so that's kind of the only place he focuses is downtown areas.
Well, you didn't mention the, a limitation being, access to an interstate, so does that come up a lot?
It's a great question, I was thinking
Yeah.
that too.
Every deal.
Every day?
If 501 was restricted access border to border, it would not be so much of an issue, but when you've gotta go through the city of Roxborough, no bypass around the stoplights and the traffic, it comes up every time we get dinged on that.
What other challenges do we have, Sherry?
Sometimes, people don't think that we can meet their workforce needs. I think that a lot of the projects now are life sciences and they wanna be in RTP, they want that address, they want that research and development collaboration, or their distribution, and we're too remote. I think that we could benefit from diversifying what we're going after. And David and I have talked about, you know, let's try to grow our tech sector here. And I think now that we have even more opportunity because of COVID and the fiber that we have, if we can get that lit and serving people, and people being able to work from home, being this close to Durham, I think that's an opportunity, you know, maybe providing some better paying jobs than some of the manufacturing, but manufacturing still has the biggest multiplier effect for the induced and indirect jobs.
Do you know how many people drive to Durham now to work? At one time it was like 8,000 people.
Yeah, it's a little less now, you know, it's still over 7,000,
I heard 7,900, somewhere recently.
yes. Well, not just to Durham, but who commute out. And when you pull those numbers, they include a lot of things, but still, yeah, it's a big number that we definitely want to turn around.
From a budget and funding perspective, do you think it's preferred to have funding that you can use at your discretion, or an economic development department can use at its discretion, BRE versus attraction of new business or courtship of new business? Or do you think it would be better to have separate funding sources? It sounded to me like some of the counties where the departments are split, there's more county money going towards BRE and more of the private funding going towards attraction and retention. And I guess that's because the private businesses would be more inclined to put their money into bringing new business with whom they could do business, as opposed to a private business potentially investing money so that their neighbor or worse yet competitor could expand. But the county would be funding more of the BRE, figuring that they're just sort of recirculating some of the tax revenues that business is generating and allowing them to expand, which would create more tax revenues and sort of perpetuate.
I hadn't thought of anybody who really breaks it out or separates it. I know Mac was talking about having to go to the private funds when he was doing things that, might involve, I think he called it whining and dining or something
Yeah, I was
like that.
thinking more the attraction there.
Right,
Of new business.
Well, for us, that would just be because we couldn't buy alcohol with public money and the public scrutiny if you took somebody out to dinner or something. I mean, I wanted to send some Tunnel Creek wine and some gift baskets to some travel we usually do that we couldn't do in person, and I thought that would be very impactful and make a great statement about the county, but, I couldn't buy it, but I also couldn't ship it. I found out that's illegal. So that worked out okay.
Can Tunnel Creek ship it?
They could, but it was going in a basket from EDPNC with different counties.
Oh.
So, yeah, we.
But the
sent-
chamber
we
could,
sent
the
Tunnel-
chamber could have done it,
Private
right?
money.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that is one reason, but yeah, I hadn't heard of anybody saying that the private sector didn't really want to invest in existing industry support because I think they just see it as the pot that churns. Now we do hear companies that don't like it. They didn't like the Bollywood announcement because that was gonna be competition for them, for their jobs. So that's a challenge. Jennifer talked about that and maybe Lee did too. Thinking about, Kevin, he seemed like he was still kind of thinking, he wasn't too sure they had the support they needed with their model, it seemed like. So, it's always a work in progress.
That's when we need to remind them of the property tax rate. Those companies that say, I don't want competition in here, you don't want investment in the county for increasing your tax base? Well, something's wrong with that because it may lower their taxes in the long run. You know what I'm saying?
I think the biggest struggle right now with everybody though is finding skilled workers. They'd rather pay more out, and have the good people, not have the turnover.
Any other questions?
Very helpful.
Great. Do you have any questions for these guys?
No, I mean, I would just, in closing, kind of rhetorically, just consider what do you hope the money would be for? Are there specialized things that you think need to happen? And I know you've been careful to keep your focus to finding the model and letting somebody else figure out, how it's spent necessarily or who carries out the duties and makes those directional decisions, but surely you have some presuppositions to what you think needs to be happening. So just, maybe kind of think about that when you're examining the models, and how they're used in other counties. I think, I would wanna remind you that we are doing well. We're okay. We have the growth. It's coming this way. And, in a 30 or 45-minute presentation from some other counties, that you would not kind of romanticize what goes on in other places, because everybody has their issues. And then the last thing would probably be to maybe temper your expectations, and I know that everybody values what you all are doing and the time you're putting into it, but it does have to be something that everybody can get on board with to make a change. Otherwise, another group will come in the next time and change it right back. We've seen that so many times. And I'm not sure about the timing, like I said, going out and doing fundraising. And if the county wants to engage Rick, he can probably give them some guidance on what he's been seeing with fundraising right now, because I know some other counties are coming up on their time to recycle those requests.
Okay, great.
All good points, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for jumping through hoops